Hello and good afternoon, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio online lunchtime talk. These are live every Friday at 1 p.m. My name is Hilary and I am research lead at Watershed. These talks are our chance to throw open the digital doors of the Pervasive Media Studio and for you to hear more from the people who are part of our community or who are working on things that really excite us. Especially big welcome to those who are new to the studio or joining us for the first time. And for all those newcomers, here's a little bit about what we do. The PM Studio is a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, with everything from product design to game design to augmented performance and choreography and new forms of digital storytelling. We're a partnership between Watershed, the University of the West of England, and the University of Bristol. And we are a home for early ideas and a meeting place for both creative and commercial industries. We're also a studio space, offering desk space, meeting rooms, events, and opportunities, all for free. But more importantly, we are a safe space for creatives to take risks in their practice and make time for collaboration. Today, we're really excited to have Control Shift Network, a collective of artists, technologists, and producers who ask us how can we reframe and rethink our relationships with technology. In the talk, we have curators Becca Rose, Martha King, and Rod Dickinson, and they will discuss core ideas behind their event. There will be a Q&A at the end with the talk running at about 35 minutes. So if you want to ask us questions, please pop them in the chat window and I'll pick them out and ask the speakers. Remember, you'll need to be signed into a Google account to post in the chat window. And please, as we're going along with the talk, feel free to post responses and reactions in the chat. We really want to know what you think and how you're feeling today. A captioned and recorded version of the talk will be available here after the talk is finished. Enjoy.
Hello. Hi. I'm Becca Rose.
And I'm Martha King.
Hi, and I'm Rod Dickinson.
And we are co-curating Control Shift. We just wanted to say now that Control Shift is part of a much bigger network of artists and designers, creative technologists and producers, as Hilary just mentioned. And so hopefully some of you are in the chat and watching and just wanted to have a big shout out to you all before we start our talk. So I shall start sharing the slides. Yeah, so hopefully you can all see the slides there. And I just, first of all, want to say thanks for everyone for watching, and also thanks for PM Studio for having us so we can talk about Control Shift today. It's really great to be here. We're going to start this talk by sharing a little bit about where Control Shift came from. Then we're going to talk about some of the main themes for the program this year and share a little bit about some of the artists' work. And then finally, we're really excited to introduce two artist commissions who we're working with. And we're going to play some films from those artists to kind of describe the work that they are making at Control Shift. So what is Control Shift? Well, it's a program of arts based on, as Hilary said, rethinking and reimagining our relationship with the digital. And we believe that we need to radically rethink and address some of the issues that we have with technology at the moment and embrace new ways of interacting with digital technologies. And so what we're doing is we're putting on workshops, talks, and an exhibition in Bristol. And we were going to be putting on Control Shift this weekend. So this would have been a kind of opening event, but of course we're not doing that and we've had to postpone it. And so instead what we're doing is we're working on a program that is a hybrid blend of online and some safe activity in real life. And this, we're excited to say, is going to be happening in the autumn of this year.
So to tell you a little bit about where Control Shift came from. So last winter, a group of Bristol and Bath-based artists, technologists, coders and producers came together to run an event called You Make the Rules as part of the International Processing Community Day. Processing Community Day is a global celebration of art, code and diversity, celebrating the amazing P5 software, which was developed to make creative coding more accessible, which lots of artists use. I'd suggest looking it up if you don't know of it, it's great. So for this event, we ran a day of hands-on workshops and talks at a co-working space in Bristol city centre called Frameworks for a range of levels and ages, exploring creative ways to understand and make things with code, including learning to code through potato printing and making zines based on the principles of rules and algorithms. Basically finding lots of tangible, tactile, creative ways to get into the digital. You can see the flyers for the event on the slide now. We also held an algo-rave, which is live coding, music and visuals performance at the Cube Cinema called Reprogram the Cube, which sold out. The event allowed us as a collective to form partnerships with the Institute of Coding, UE, Norwest Media Centre, and the partner venues who provided significant in-kind support. We reached over 230 people on one day, from families to artists, coders, and people curious to learn more. The Processing Community Day organisers, the Processing Foundation, recognised the event as one of the most successful examples of creative engagement during all of the global events. So we'd made this happen with really minimal funding and realised there was a real appetite for this kind of activity. As a group, we reflected and realised we all wanted to do more of this. And so we started planning, developing partnerships and fundraising. And in January 2020, we got an Arts Council grant to create Control Shift.
And what we really wanted to do was to build on what we'd done the year before, but we wanted to add more artists. We wanted to have a digital art exhibition with more critical talks and more networking, and actually also to physically spread the program out across the city. So distribute it across unusual spaces, allowing greater and more diverse audiences to encounter it. So that's really our aim for this year. And then the main themes and questions we wanted to explore with the program, as Becca's already mentioned, were loosely about how we reframe and rethink our relationship with technology, but a bit more specifically thinking about what might happen if there was more space for poetic and tactile engagements with the digital. How can we reconsider our connections and our responsibilities and our embodied entanglements with technology? And ultimately, really, how can we reconceive of computing and rethink about it in a way that moves it beyond our very orthodox neoliberal version of digital platforms and computing that we currently have? Alongside this, Bristol also has a really long history of radical digital art stretching way back into the early 90s. And Control Shift follows quite closely in those footsteps as well.
And so we may not have all the solutions or answers as such, but we're really interested in speculating and asking what if, and repositioning things from other perspectives to get a different view on them. And this kind of idea, this speculative asking what if idea is encapsulated by Fiona Raby in her foreword to a book called Stitching Worlds. And she does a speculative exercise to imagine what technology might be like if they were made by kind of people who make textiles, like craftswomen. And she says, would craftswomen have produced drones? I'm not sure, but I know if they had, they would be different. And she goes on to imagine what drones might be like if they were produced by textile makers, for example. And she says perhaps the drones would have been more awkward and less aerodynamic, slightly unconventional, distinctive, or more convivial. And in a similar way that textiles crafts are often about gathering people, like in quilting bees or stitching circles, she asks if the drones might have had a different purpose and had a purpose of gathering people together for social events or for pleasure. And another kind of quote that I think we're quite inspired by is from Anab Jane from Superflux, a design company based in London. And she says, it may be the end of the world as we know it, but other worlds are possible. If you can move beyond quick fixes, we become open to the strange and the unknown, the ambiguous and the uncertain, the weird, the weird and the provisional. And I think what she's saying is that this is not about kind of building one future. There's not one way to fix things or one kind of tool that we need, but there are like kind of many entangled and complex ways of thinking about tools and technologies we use.
And so our overarching theme for this year's programme is around tools, asking what tools do we need to imagine and create the futures we want? Who has the power to do so? And how can we shift control? So through a programme of workshops, talks, artworks and opportunities to network, the Control Shift programme aims to explore and find new ways of understanding, reflecting and reimagining our digital tools.
So one of the approaches that some of the artworks and workshops explore is sort of new way of understanding our existing digital tools. So for example, how to understand and repurpose the way that information is encoded. And we're going to hear more about this very shortly with Bristol-based artists Wisterlitz in just a moment. But we're also interested in, some of the artists are also interested in things like how networks are structured, how might we go about understanding that, or how our actions and our interactions are intertwined and systemic. So for example, Heath Bunting is going to be creating a map of consequential paradox for Control Shift. The artworks and workshops in Control Shift all use very practical, accessible and hands-on methods to unravel what are otherwise really quite complex concepts. So for example, Berlin-based group Melt, that's Lauren Britton and Isabel Pear, will be staging their network mapping game Meow ID, and you can see that being staged in the image there on the screen. In Meow ID, players take the role of cats and meow to address each other. And then as they perform different rules on different network structures, they weave different patterns, creating networks from wool.
And another way that we're thinking about digital tools is through reflecting on how they impact us. For example, reflecting on how digital tools can discriminate against race, class, ability, reflecting on how digital tools may be only accessible for some, and reflecting on how digital tools impact our bodies. And Dasha Ilana does this really well through her Centre for Technological Pain, which is a kind of fictional design centre that uses open source solutions to health problems caused by digital technologies, such as our kind of smartphones or laptops. And these kind of functional devices for eye strain, neck pain, insomnia, or cubital syndrome, which you can kind of see some of the illustrations she's made of these devices in the slide. And the Centre for Technological Pain questions the physical effects of technology through designing objects to kind of combat or correct the pain that they bring.
And other artists in the programme will offer ways to reimagine and even create new digital tools, exploring how we can repurpose and hack digital tools and radically imagine new forms. Arjun Harrison-Mann and Ben Redgrove, who we will hear from soon, are doing exactly this, harnessing DIY ethics to explore radical accessibility. And Kathy Hind, who is pictured here, will be leading a deep listening walk using customized hydrophones and software to enable access to hidden sounds. So we don't have time today to describe all of the artists that are involved, but just to say that there are just over 30 artists who will be part of the programme, who were all selected through an open call process that we ran earlier this year. And we have a mix of Southwest-based, national and international artists.
And so today we're going to introduce two of the new commissions for Control Shift. And the first one is the artwork is called Knit Witter, by Wisterlitz, which are Bristol-based artists Becky Hurwitz and Liz Lister. And they're going to explain in a video in a little moment some of the ideas and inspiration for Witter. But Witter is basically a digital platform that encodes text into binary code as a knitting pattern. So messages can be secretly encoded into a piece of knitting. And Becky and Liz are asking people to create coded pieces of knitting that will be combined into a collaborative artwork and then presented in the control shift program. So we'll watch them now talk about that in their video.
Why do we even keep books? Sometimes it's, kind of obvious, they're useful. But sometimes they're not about how useful they are, but what those words meant to us at some point, what they might mean to us again in the future. We don't have to read them to know that the meaning is still there.
My phone has a frustratingly small memory, so I'm forever trying to figure out what I can delete. The thing that kind of strikes me a lot of the time is the amount of data in my text messages. And I always think, well, I could just delete the stuff in text messages. There's nothing of any importance in there. It's like it's got stuff that goes back to 2017. I've got no idea even what it might be. But somehow I'm like really resistant to the idea of deleting any of this stuff.
We live in a world where everything around us and about us has been turned into digital data. This data is collected, stored, retrieved, processed by computers like smartphones. And for most of us, it remains a kind of abstract concept.
So as part of the Control Shift Arts programme, Wisterlitz has created Witter, a collaborative artwork that creates tactile engagement with data through knitting and crochet.
Witter is an invitation to anyone familiar with knitting needles or crochet hook and yarn to encode a message into a pattern that's based on an interpretation of your message as digital data.
The Witter app will encode your text into binary code and then into a pattern that you can knit or crochet in a multitude of different ways, so the creativity is left open to you.
Then we ask that you complete the process by sending us your knitted or crocheted message. It will become part of a physical database made of yarn that will be full of people's hidden messages.
I'm kind of
Oh, we missed the end. Okay. Oh, sorry about that. I think we might have had a bit of an abrupt ending. But the nice thing is that Wisterlitz are going to be with us in the Q&A very shortly. And so you can ask them questions about how to get involved, or just more about their work, or more about Witter. They can maybe fill in some of the gap at the end of that film. Yeah, I hope we've got one more film that we'd like to share with you. And that is the second commission that we are working with artist duo Arjun Harrison-Mann and Benjamin Redgrove. And Arjun and Ben are exploring radical accessibility through making new digital tools. And yeah, I'll let you hear more about them through their film.
Hey everyone, thanks for having us. I'm Arjun.
And I'm Ben.
And we're just going to have a little chat about one of our projects that we're working on with Control Shift at the moment. We don't have a name yet, but we're still working on it now as we're kind of early days with the project. Mm-hmm. But a bit about ourselves is that we're an artist designer duo based in London. We do a lot of work about disability rights in relation to like radical accessibility. Anything you want to add from that?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, it's kind of predominantly based around the social model of disability, which is, in its kind of essence suggests that the people aren't disabled, but the society is disabling. And I think that's something we've always taken as like the kind of core tenet, or the core provocation, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah,
and I think,
definitely.
Well, there was that really interesting quote where I think, is it Finkelstein or Mike Oliver, one of the kind of like the originators of the theory, suggests that it's actually it should be considered as a form of provocation or action.
Yeah, it's like a provocation for action. Yeah, exactly. And I think for us, what we've been trying to do is take that provocation and place it within the concept, the kind of realm of art and design, and think about, what is the role of design and acting as either as a service or a provocation for the kind of rebuilding of society, making that spaces more equal, I guess.
Yeah, and I think we've sat between those two, isn't it? Service and provocation is kind of where the things, the kind of the work or the tools we create sits.
Definitely, yeah. And I think the only other thing, like, just to add, is that within our work, we're looking at a lot of like alternative methods of making protests accessible, right? And and like I think for us that means that we're touching on things like reimagining the race shifting power and presence, like looking at how we can even reimagine what it means to be inclusive and accessible, and like how can we foreground the aesthetics of accessibility. So all these things kind of like tie across our practice.
Yeah. And I think a good example is, like, should we just talk about Power Tool? Because I think that's like the most recent project, which was last year now actually, but which was kind of like, I guess that kind of was the perfect example of where we were talking about the best kind of aspects of physical protesting and the best kind of aspects of what digital kind of like protesting or digital presence can be. And we combined that in what we often tend to do, and I think Arjun sort of tends to lead the kind of digital side of things, whereas in this context I was leading the more kind of the physical side in the creation of sort of harnesses that subverted the body cam.
Yeah, definitely. And then for the digital side, it kind of just paired one person who's off-site and one person who's on-site at a protest, and paired them through live streaming, and then allowed the person who's off-site to be broadcast into a space. And then online, with the online tool, there was live subtitling, audio description, and DSL, which is all supported by the people at the protests. So reimagining, kind of think about how we can reimagine, redistribute the power. That's kind of synonymous with certain types of technologies in protest.
I think that's the key focus, isn't it? It's always about taking sort of quite slick and well-known forms of visual communication and communication of sorts, and kind of deconstructing them to a degree and rebuilding them with a kind of collective or collaborative focus to it.
Yeah, definitely. I think actually, do you want to say a bit about the kind of allyship thing in that point?
Yeah, I guess that's something we've been talking about, particularly now. It's kind of become more pertinent than ever. It's like how we position ourselves as allies of DPAC, and how we position ourselves within what we do as not only facilitators, but having to be like, but wanting to make sure we're present, but not the kind of like overly present in that sense. There's a kind of fine line and a boundary that you always have to be. I feel like we always have to be re-evaluating.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, this is something we've been trying to tackle for the last 4 years, really, because, the way we got involved in this work was a lot to do with people close to us being affected by the systemic cuts by the Tory government in 2016 to disability benefits. So, like, I think for us, it's kind of constantly been trying to work out, how to position ourselves as allies in a way that's kind of, making sure that we're putting something at stake, in the sense of like on our end, and making sure we're contributing in a meaningful way to the work of DPAC and the rest of the disability rights movement.
Yeah. And so I think in a way that's sort of what we're wanting to explore to a degree with Control Shift and our latest project, which is about the idea of kind of pairing up different contributors through these physical and digital tools as a way of exploring what the social model of disability might mean to them, or just exploring the way in which the tools and forms of communication could mean to them in terms of like accessibility.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I'd say also what the social model of disability means in relation to lockdown as well. So this new tool that we're planning to make based off the previous one will kind of respond to this idea that right now we're all living in the kind of situation where our social interactions and our movement is restricted. But we're trying to explore the nuances of what accessibility means in those spaces, as like the difference between someone who hasn't got a disability or an impairment or a chronic illness versus somebody who has. The accessibility issues there are a lot more nuanced, and they're quite different. So it's using this as a space to explore that. And I think our aim is to kind of pair people together who have a lived experience of this or are working around these areas, whether they're like theorists or activists or kind of artists. Does that sound about right to you, Ben?
Yeah, and I think we've got this tentative structure which is based around sort of three different kind of instances of this like format, and I think that's going to be, for the moment, we're thinking like theory, performance, and action. So we're hoping to kind of like get a sense of through different kind of contributors, the way in which that they would kind of conceptualize or perform or react or enact these kind of things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think within this, like this time around, the kind of making of the harnesses on like an individual basis for each pair is quite an exciting moment for us. And we're hoping that through doing that and through kind of open sourcing the process and doing a kind of do with others kind of approach, we're quite excited to see like what kind of outcomes are made in a very generative model and like how we can start to reimagine the tools in a way that's more personal and reflective of people involved. Yeah, I mean, is there anything else you want to add, or is that kind of it for now?
I think that's good. I mean, like, I suppose perhaps we, if it kind of didn't make much sense as what we were saying, I think there should be some links to the kind of work we do and the images of it. And obviously, as things progress, we'll be producing content and hopefully open source instructions and things like that, so people can kind of start to get involved with the project, which would be great.
Yeah, definitely. And let us know if you want any more information or want to get involved.
Yeah.
Send us an email. We look forward to having the chat with you all at the Q&A.
Nice one. Cheers, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Great. And just also to say, we just wanted to end by saying a big thank you, of course, to all of our funders. So to Arts Council England, Northwest Media Centre, Southwest Creative Technology Network, Institute of Coding and University of West England, and all of our supporters and mentors. Also, we wanted to say a huge thank you and appreciation to all of our collaborators, all the people who've been working with us so far to make last year's event happen and also planning into this one. So that's obviously us three here today, and then also Coral Manton, Claire Morley, Lucas Sweeney, James Wood, Ellie Foreman, Alice Haynes, Pete Bennett, Dave Webb, Steve Battle, Martin O'Leary. And we are growing as a network. So we obviously we have all of the new artists who are will be joining us for this program, some of which we've mentioned today. And also we do meet up regularly. So yeah, you can also join, get involved in different ways. So there's our email address and there's Twitter. And then if you go to our website as well, you can also join our mailing list. So yeah, thank you very much.
Hello. Hi. Okay. So thanks so much to all our speakers for joining us today. That was really interesting. I love that we're thinking about redefining the social at the same time as everyone else. So well done. We have a couple of questions coming in for people here, so I'm going to just start with some of them. We have one from Yui Games, and the first question is for the Knit Twitter group, and it is, they said they love the idea of a physical database and they can't wait to see people's messages, but will people be provided a means to decipher the code? So I'm not sure who wants to take that. Maybe Liz, you could take that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So just quickly. So I'm Liz, and I'm here with Becky, and we're Wisterlitz. We've been working together through the COVID thing via these kind of mechanisms, and we're used to doing this much more closely together. So this is all a bit strange, but yeah, the idea of a database of yarn was kind of it was more of a kind of abstract thought about what we were going to create with Witter. So it is a way of describing the artwork that we're going to create at the end of this process. The beginning of this process was the coming up with a way for people to encode their messages, and we were quite keen on those messages being hidden and secret in a way that, as Becca referenced at the sort of towards the beginning of the talk, that a lot of sort of this the craft of women that goes into creating things like textiles is often quite hidden and secret as well. But essentially the tool that we've created to encode the messages is what exists, and it's a very simple encoding mechanism. It's just text as ASCII into a binary code. That's how it is. And so to back out of that again possibly would be quite easy. So I've got a piece of knit Witter crochet because I can't knit. And you can see possibly it looks a bit like a punch card from the olden days of when data was encoded in cards with holes in. You could, you know, zeros and ones, that's what it is. You could probably figure it out from that what that message is, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. But it is possible, and people have been building layers of complexity into their knitting and crochet to sort of provide even more challenge to try and decode the message. I don't know if Becky, you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things. So one thing to add is a bit that would have been in the video, but unfortunately got cut, was that there is sort of a heritage to this, in that there are stories not necessarily verifiable, but there are stories of secret messages and espionage being done through the medium of textiles in both world wars. So like various mechanisms for hiding coded messages in knitting and in woven items as well. And the other is like there's a whole kind of layer, as Liz kind of mentioned, of complexity or simplicity and sort of redundancy that you can create in these messages. So I've been experimenting with like one message. Just I wanted to make some samples. It's not a very imaginative message because I'm a nerd, and so it says hello world, but my knitting is really bad, so it probably doesn't say hello world. So this was just like the most compressed version of it, which is like every single knit or purl stitch is one of the units of binary code, and I think it's so inaccurately knitted that there's little chance of anyone being able to like fully decode it. And then kind of, I guess the other, sorry, I've managed to wind these all up. At the other end of complexity, this is like blocks of, each bit is like a block of knitting. And so that's kind of much less concise and I guess much more interpretable. And then like if you do like something like rows of colour with one colour for 1 and 1 colour for 0, as long as you know which way up it is, it becomes immediately much easier to decode, as long as you know what the ASCII reference is. And so there's a whole like range of depths of encoding that you can go to with this, and obscuring your message or making it quite transparent depending on what you want from your piece.
Thank you, that's really great. Some of the comments are great. They're knitted punch cards circling back to Ada Lovelace. And Martin says the database of yarn reminds him a lot of Inca Quipu, sorry, my bad, encoding information in patterns of knots. Yeah, I have a question for you actually, because it's lovely, the themes in your work that I'm learning about for all of you and for the festival are sort of working against this idea as technology being this intractable, shiny thing that exists. You know, we're used to all the blue swishy images that are sort of used in technological media all the time, as if it's this perfect thing that you don't know anything about. And actually you've got very tactile, very tangible, messy sort of approaches that you're returning to, which kind of already exist, but maybe were ignored in sort of mainstream media. How do you do that now when we are in this silly pandemic world where we can't all maybe gather in a room and touch the same things together and actually feel that or experience that kind of those ways of being? Does anybody, maybe Becca or Martha, have thoughts about that, or anyone else, if you chip in if you feel like it?
Yeah, maybe I'll start, and then Martha, you can kind of add to it if there's anything I've missed. Yeah, so I think it's been a bit of a journey, I suppose, we've been on, because obviously this weekend we were going to be hosting this festival and inviting people from all over Europe and the UK, and also have local people from Bristol kind of gathered. And we were, you know, part of our main themes, like you said, is kind of tactile, embodied materiality in technology. And I think initially we were actually thinking, well, let's just, you know, let's just not do this. Let's just you know, just do something next year or not. And because we just felt like it wasn't the right format for doing such a material based festival or event that we're doing. And I think just as times went on, we learned a lot from what a lot of other people were doing. that there are these kind of moments of engagement that we can do online together that kind of, you know, as well as maybe introducing some tactility and some materiality into the online space, they also, you know, it kind of questions how we are using online tools to communicate as well. And I think we found that quite interesting, and we found like that we wanted to host this kind of hybrid blend of online space and be really creative and critical about what we're doing in that space, and then also have a kind of safe space physically with some exhibitions where people can kind of maybe see things as they're passing in Bristol. And I think part of that was what we're really excited about is using this space as to play with the format, because of our like how excited we are about materiality and embodiment in technology. I think this is a, you know, way that we can bring some ideas together about this. So I'm just trying to think of an example now, like I went to a really wonderful workshop recently for a festival, and the whole thing was done in ASMR. So it was kind of whispered really close, and it was really interesting. And I think it kind of completely changed the format of this space that we're all communicating in now, which can be very, it doesn't feel like a kind of material embodied space. And it really did feel that way. And I think what we want to do is just really bring some of these ideas and learn from what people are doing, and also kind of be creative ourselves within the online space. And maybe Martha, you might want to add to that as well.
Yeah, just building on that, around sort of learning about some other examples that are out there, and taking it as a real creative challenge to really think about how we can blend the digital and the physical, and really, yeah, not forget the senses. Just thinking about one of our partners, Norwest Media Centre. They've been doing great stuff at the moment with workshops and artist commissions that really blending both online but also the physical. Like we're in our homes, or we're going out on our daily walks. What have we got to hand? What materials can we use? And how can we create structures where people get really involved in what they've got to hand, what's there, and also, yeah, highlighting in that the senses, our bodies, and also actually that blended actually also gives a chance to really continue thinking really deeply about inclusivity, and actually means that what we make online, make sure we make that as accessible as possible, which actually in some ways might mean more people can access it than if we had just purely done a live workshop in a particular place. And I think also having to think more in a kind of distributed way also, I think, pushes us to think even more creatively in terms of where things happen and where things are located. So we're not just thinking about city centres, but we're thinking about different neighbourhood spaces and all areas of cities. And obviously, yeah, thinking about that safely, but also thinking about the real potential around public space at the moment, and how we can work with partners and city council, and actually what could be possible from now. So yeah, really kind of seizing that potential, you know, and also a chance to also be a little bit slower and take a bit more time. Like we were going to have a program that probably would have happened condensed within a weekend, or at least a week, but actually we can spread things out even more. We can take time and be aware that we don't need to, you know, the online space has become quite overwhelming as well, and quite kind of, there's a lot of content. So how can we pace this in a way that feels appropriate and gives us space to really kind of engage in things really properly. I've been really inspired by Heart of Glass's slow conference for a fast evolving crisis with For About, which has been happening spread over about a month, which I think is brilliant and definitely worth checking out if you're not aware of it.
Thanks. You might we'll share some links after the talks to some of the projects that our speakers have been speaking about. And you brought something up there, I think, about slowness, and I also want to ask you about that. I think, just to respond to your last comment, I think it's lovely that you are trying to understand the individuality of all the people that are experiencing your work, because I think sometimes we have and I say we as in many people have taken for granted that if you do, let's say, a theatre show, a straightforward theatre show, there's a stage, you're facing an audience, you have, all those people are not in the same space. Yes, they're all sitting there and they all look like humans looking the same, but everyone has a different story. Everyone has a different understanding of what's going on. Everyone has different needs. And I love that you're not only shifting your sort of production model, but actually also how you relate to your audiences. And I think that's really nice. And yeah, definitely the slowness of some of your projects. I was thinking myself, I am a furious tweeter, which, you know, I'm sure nobody enjoys except me. But, you know, the slowness of having to think about knitting something. It's like, if I had one tweet a week, what would that tweet be? I like that you force this kind of thoughtful process into your work. And I'm wondering if anyone has to say more about that slowness in your social interactions.
I mean, I suppose I'd just say also that I think quite often art is actually very slow, and perhaps when we experience it, that isn't entirely clear or visible. Actually, sometimes artists do take an enormous long time to develop things very slowly that get consumed very, very quickly. And the kind of work that goes behind that, and perhaps the collaborations and participation that sort of evolves often over really many years, becomes unfortunately quite invisible. So this might be an opportunity to sort of make that kind of re-emerge and a little more present and a little more palpable.
And I just want to say about the knitting and the slowness. I think having made some of messages, it really makes you sit with what you're saying. You really have to kind of get into that message, and you are there for literal hours thinking about what you wrote. And it kind of reminds me a little bit about the craftivist movement, and how it's kind of like slow, thoughtful activism. So you could put something really angry into your message, and you have to sit with that for hours, and maybe by the end of it, maybe by the time you've knitted it for a week, you're over it. And that difference between furious tweeting and furious knitting, I mean, they're two completely different things, really, aren't they? So yeah, I think that slowness and that time to sit with an idea is really, really important.
Yeah, and that also feels really relevant now, because obviously people are in this horrible situation where they're having to choose to protest or not, where putting their bodies in physical space is even more complicated than it would be last month or 3 months ago now, maybe, when there wasn't COVID. And that's so finding new ways of expressing forms of social thoughts or actions feels also really relevant. So you're hitting all the marks. We've got some really good comments going here in the chat. I'm not going to read them all out, but people are, Arjun, they're discussing the social model of disability. And I don't think we've any more questions coming in. But I suppose, how do people engage? Oh, Martha, tell me first.
I was just going to say, jumping off the thing you were just saying there about protest, that Ben and Arjun, with the power tools that they were discussing earlier, that they've actually at the moment they say they're putting together they're going to put together a simple site and resources for proxy protesting at the moment. So that might be something. I don't know if they're in the chat there, but I don't know whether they might want to sort of say something that we could relay a little bit more specifically around that, just as it's sort of so connected to what you were just saying.
Maybe go on, Hilary.
No, you go.
I was just going to add to that, because just to give them some time to say things in the chat, but the proxy protests, they've kind of made these wonderful DIY harnesses, which they were talking about in the film. And they're really simple kind of ways in which you can kind of strap a phone to your body, so that you can be in proxy with someone and kind of going in the outside world and have a dialogue between someone who's kind of needs to stay at home and someone who can be outside. But yeah, they're really using quite simple tools or simple materials that you might have around the house, and kind of, yeah, they're just really exploring how people can make them themselves at home.
I mean, there's a sort of a theme as well that emerges, I think, across the artworks, where some of them are really concerned with the sorts of DIY practices that were very prevalent in the early 90s, when artists really tried to sort of take on the opportunities that the internet offered, and also to sort of critique it right from the beginning, and primarily using sort of DIY technologies, because of course at that point all of the platforms that we're used to using now to facilitate communication and production and co-production didn't exist. So everything you did, you had to kind of make from the bottom up. So there's a sort of interesting inversion, I think, that's happening with some of these artworks, where they riff a little bit off some of those ideas, but they're also kind of addressing actually the emergence of those platforms and how they've transformed and changed how we interact.
Another theme, well, maybe it's not a theme, but it seems to be a feature, is that you have artists from not just locally in Bristol, but you have them from across the Southwest. You said there are international artists. Can you tell us a bit more about how that's working now, because you're in this new world, to use a terrible term? Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
So I think in the very first instance, what we wanted from the programme was to first of all have it very centred on Bristol, which has this very rich media history, media arts history, and has a kind of has a history of activism as well, and then kind of reach out as well to internationally and connect with artists that are working across Europe and beyond, and incorporate them into the program. So it's a kind of mix really of a more sort of locally centric idea and a more kind of with a more sort of global reach. So we kind of worked in the selection process. We worked with Furtherfield, who's a kind of media arts organisation in London, and also with Axioma, who are an organisation and gallery in Ljubljana in Slovenia. So right from the off, really, we were kind of interested in that sort of reach and the sort of local centricness of the work, and I think partly because we think there's some really great things going on locally as well, right? There's some really fantastic local creative producers, and it really felt that there wasn't a space where they could show their work, where they could network together, where there could be a sort of platform for artworks, and so we really felt like we wanted to respond with that, really.
Brilliant, thanks, Rod. We have a question here and a comment from Bernadette Buckley. The projects mentioned so far are very progressive, but how do you respond to criticisms that platforms like YouTube, which we're on now, which are still instrumental in this work, are implicated in platform capitalism? And there's a follow-up. Does this influence the work you're doing? And are you critical of technology as well as supportive of its potential? Big questions there. Anyone want to jump in?
I mean, I think the whole idea of being intertwined, is inevitable. Really, you never escape being intertwined with things. But being intertwined with something doesn't necessarily mean you accept it on its terms. That you can kind of think of ways of repurposing it, or reinvigorating it, or changing it, or utilizing it in a very different way. So, I mean, Ben and Arjun are actually developing a mobile app, but the mobile app is going to work in a way that you wouldn't expect perhaps a mobile app to work. So, and I think that's the case with the case with, for example, Kathy Hines' work, where she's kind of repurposing hydrophones and customized software, using it for in a way that you wouldn't commercially expect it to be used, and also to an end which you wouldn't expect it to be commercially used either. So the intertwining, I think, is part of the sort of complexity of the circumstance that we find ourselves in, and rather than ignore it, actually it's much better just to sort of embrace it and and use that as a starting point to develop things from.
I would say that also in our sort of mode of when we're saying reflecting, that definitely criticality is definitely in there, and a lot of the artists that we're working with do bring that kind of awareness for us to kind of form critique. For example, the Women Reclaiming AI project, which allows us to think about kind of gender biases which are built in to certain chatbots and softwares and things. But rather than, I think one of the things for us with the program was that we didn't just, it's great to become more aware of the the difficulties and the negative aspects of these technologies, but rather than just sitting there with being critical, we definitely wanted to move into a space of an offering or of an action, and of a way of being able to reimagine and move forward. So we definitely wanted to position ourselves somewhere between what I often see is a kind of wild optimism around technology or a kind of deep kind of dystopianism. We kind of really wanted to sit in a position in between, which I actually found inspiration from a festival that was in Eindhoven called Stripe, and they called it a kind of critical optimism, which I find a really useful kind of space to operate within. And I don't know if Becca, did you want to say maybe a little bit about the Fediverse, because that one feels quite relevant in relation to thinking about technology, thinking forwards from a kind of critical but kind of.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to describe the whole of the Fediverse in the next few minutes, but I'll try my best. So part of the program, Martin O'Leary, who's been working incredibly hard behind the scenes, putting all of this YouTube video together, and myself are going to do a workshop about the Fediverse. And this is this kind of open source protocol. So it's a way that lots of different apps that we communicate with can kind of connect together. And it's a kind of alternative to Twitter or Facebook or the kind of maybe dominant social media apps that we use all the time. And part of the kind of key idea around the Fediverse is about kind of understanding and acknowledging that we want to communicate with each other through these apps, and that's part of our lives, but also acknowledging that maybe those spaces aren't quite set up with how we want them. And specific to these kind of networks, these new social media networks in the Fediverse, is you can kind of create smaller groups where you can have maybe more intimate conversations, but then you can also kind of connect with other groups. So rather than this kind of like, like Hilary was saying, kind of Twitter broadcasting in real time, maybe you're having these kind of smaller conversations that are connecting in small groups and then connecting wider to a kind of bigger network. And I think we kind of learned about this, and Meow ID, also the work that we showed you with the strings are kind of exploring some of these ideas in their work. And I think we're just really just interested in how some of these tools can change the way that we interact together. And Martin will be developing a completely new Fediverse network for Control Shift. So that will be happening, and I imagine be doing the workshop in that space. But one thing maybe to add to that is that anyone who's kind of used some of these tools, Mastodon is probably one of the most famous kind of alternative social network tools. They're really, for me anyway, and someone who uses technology a lot, I find them quite complicated to use, and they're not necessarily so straightforward. And so you do end up defaulting to these kind of big platforms, like the person in the question said. And so I think part of that is kind of, questioning that and maybe learning about how to use these different tools in different ways. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that.
Well, maybe it's just worth saying as well, just to explain about the Fediverse and Mastodon system, that they exist on your own servers, right? So the data and the information doesn't travel to another platform servers. It exists within your own servers. It's actually a very early kind of, early internet idea of hosting information, where your information was on your server, not on Google's server, and not on Dropbox's server, and not on Facebook's server or wherever. So that's maybe an important aspect of understanding how those tools work.
And that links nicely into me telling you about the Southwest Creative Technology Network, which is one of the Watershed's projects, which is also, I think, Kathy's part of, where we're looking at data and how data control and all the issues around how it's made, collected, what it is to everyone. And so there's lots more information on our website. I'm going to wrap it up there. If anybody has anything else to say, if they just want to remind us how to connect with the festival, because it seems like there's going to be so many brilliant things happening really soon.
best way to connect. Go to our Twitter, I think, control_shift_, our big platform Twitter that we use. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Liz, Rod, Rebecca, Becca, Martha, Arjun, and Ben in the chat, and everyone who's come along for the talk today. Their next week's talk is Carnucopia, Hope, Greed and Cultured Meat. And David Lisser will be joining us. He's an artist whose recent works imagine the future of cultured meat and the role of technology in food. And he's going to join us to discuss the potential, the problems and the utter weirdness of this fledgling industry. And I recommend it as a do not miss. You'll get news about all our future talks by following us on @PM